Imagine being a leading theologian in the Middle Ages, spending your career locked in a debate about a mouse. Specifically, what happened if that mouse scurried across the church floor and ate a dropped crumb of the Holy Communion bread? This was a matter of life and death because of a specific logic, the belief that the bread had physically transformed into the body of Christ. If that transformation was literal, then the mouse had, quite awkwardly, consumed divinity. This materialist lens also governed baptism. The church viewed the water as a vessel for a hidden, almost physical power that stripped away human sin the moment it touched the skin. If the ritual acts like a biological change, it creates a massive contradiction when a baptized person later walks away from the faith. It implies the medicine of the water either failed or was never applied correctly in the first place. For a believer, this makes the ritual a source of deep pressure. You find yourself constantly scanning your own soul, searching for enough private purity to ensure the ritual takes, turning the table and the font into places of intense self-interrogation. The medieval mouse debate and modern religious anxiety both stem from the same mistake, viewing these acts as magical transactions. To find a different logic, we have to look past the Middle Ages and into a first-century world defined by supernatural conflict. The Apostle Peter writes that baptism saves you, but points the reader away from the water to Noah's flood. To his original readers, the flood wasn't just rain. Ancient texts described it as a divine response to rebelling fallen angels. These angels, called the Watchers, were said to have descended to earth, fathered the Nephilim, and released chaos into the world. In this worldview, the flood waters served as a cosmic prison to lock these spirits away in the underworld. Ancient tradition holds that after his death, Jesus descended into that very prison. He went there to announce his victory to those captive spirits, proving that the powers of the underworld no longer held the keys to death. Peter describes baptism using the Greek word eperotema, which refers to a formal pledge or a loyalty oath. It links the act of baptism to this specific victory over the Watchers. The Greek grammar uses the middle voice, indicating that baptism is an act the individual performs for themselves. It is a decision of the will rather than a passive treatment performed by a priest. This shifts the focus from the chemistry of the water to the intent of the person. Baptism becomes a public declaration of cosmic war, signaling a permanent switch in loyalty to the victorious king. The church similarly over-mystified communion by taking Jesus' metaphor in John chapter 6 about eating his flesh as the literal instruction manual for the ritual. The timeline makes the error clear. Jesus gave that sermon in John 6 long before the Last Supper even took place. He was using a metaphor for faith, not describing a chemical change in a piece of bread. The actual blueprint for communion is found in the Old Testament peace offering, a concept Paul utilizes to explain the table to the early church. Unlike a sin offering, which was burned away to pay a debt, the peace offering was a meal. It was an act of fellowship shared between the worshiper and God. This framing changes the ritual from a moment of penance into a victory celebration. The table is where the community eats with the judge who has already settled the case and now joins the feast. Most of our modern anxiety about the table comes from Paul's warning to the Corinthians that eating unworthily brings judgment. In a first-century house church, this meal was a literal potluck dinner held in the homes of the wealthy. The physical layout of these homes reflected the social hierarchy of the Roman world. The wealthy members would arrive early and eat the best food, while the poor laborers arrived late to find the table empty. The unworthy behavior Paul was condemning was this specific act of greed. Paul defines sinning against the body as the social exclusion of the poor. He was concerned with how the community treated one another, not with the private perfection of an individual's thoughts. Understanding this social context removes the need for the intense, agonizing introspection we often bring to the table. The focus belongs on the radical equality of the group, not the hidden sins of the individual. Over time, the church took horizontal acts of community, loyalty oaths and shared meals, and turned them into vertical scorecards used to measure personal holiness. When the focus is on community rather than dogmatic precision, the requirements for participation change. Children, for example, have a place at a family meal just by being in the family, regardless of their ability to pass a theology exam. This perspective invites you to set down the weight of trying to be clean enough for a ritual. If the table is a celebration of a completed victory, your presence there is based on the king's invitation, not your own performance. If these practices shifted so far from their original intent, it raises a larger question. How many other religious traditions have we mistaken for a private scorecard when they were always meant to be a way to